since it's a documentary festival, and see if you talk a little bit about how you approach writing about documentary film versus fiction film. Alison, you want to take that?
Sure. I cover both nonfiction and fiction film, and I think that documentary can offer a challenge in that there are some films that stress advocacy or social commentary more than, say, filmmaking craft, and I don't think that's necessarily. I don't think that those films can necessarily be approached in the same way you would a narrative film. Its goals are different, and it might be a little closer to journalism in how it's made. And it's something that I think criticism in general still sort of tussles with, in that how do you review a film that's not really, that's aims are totally different from, say, a drama or a comedy. I think that for me, my taste, I think, in terms of criticism, leans more towards documentary films that do interesting things in terms of craft. But I don't have a solid answer for you here, but I think it's where you run into that issue sometimes where people say, oh, documentaries always get great reviews because subject matter tends to get reviewed instead of the film itself.
Yeah, John,
address that? I don't know if I'm on an opposite page from you, but I think documentaries, from a critical point of view, have to fulfill certain things that features do too. I mean, I think if you don't have a good story, if you don't have good characters, if you don't have an arc to the movie, you're not going to work as a documentary or as a feature. So that's where I come from on it. It's interesting about the good, documentaries always getting good reviews. It's like I used to get criticized, why do these Iranian films always get good reviews? Well, because it's so damn hard for them to get reviewed in the first place. I mean, the movie has to be so much better than the competition that it's going to tend to be reviewed better, just because the struggle has been so much greater. So, and I don't think people realize that, documentaries get good reviews, but it's harder to get in a theater or get exposure for a documentary.
Life 2.0 was my first feature, and I actually hadn't really been to many festivals, period. So I was so new to this, and to open with Sundance was overwhelming. Originally I was thinking, well, I don't really want to spend the money on a publicist. I don't know if it's necessary. And other filmmakers were saying, you have to do this because you really owe it to yourself. This is such a special thing to premiere at Sundance. Like, it's going to be very hard for your film to get attention because it's a very low-profile film. I'm like an unknown director. So I hired a publicist, David Magdell, who was great. And partly what was so good is just kind of hand-holding, like almost like a festival coach, like a personal therapist during the festival, saying, just making me feel good and managing my expectations and massaging my ego and stuff like that. And then in terms of generating press, one thing he did which was brilliant is he got a volunteer screening the night before the festival opened, so that when it opened, people go to the volunteers and say, so what do you hear is good? And actually Owen found out about the film that way, because one of the acquisitions people said, so what's good? And the person said, oh, last night we watched this great film, Life 2.0. So I thought that was a really good strategy for building awareness.
You have to keep that in mind. You're thinking about the audience for your movie, but you have to think about the audience that's going to find your movie in these different places. So, at IndieWire, we get these pitches, like hundreds of pitches every week from people who you could tell some people read the site. And other people are just sending these blasts out to everybody they can. They just go on the internet and they find as many email addresses and they just send it out. Sometimes we get things with an attachment and a subject line, but nothing in the body. And it's like, okay, so I have to make the extra step to download this thing and read all of this about it and try to figure out that you're trying to tell me something. It's like, no, you have to make it easy for us and tell us, if you look at IndieWire, we cover things in a specific way. We run interviews, we profile the subject. Sometimes we have filmmakers write about their own experiences. So if you come to us and you say, I had a really interesting experience, I think your readership would really get into it, that's where it clicks.
I think also now a lot of documentaries go right to TV, and that you might find yourself in a place where your best chance for coverage is actually the TV section of a paper that, I think Marathon Boys playing tonight on HBO, and that's a film that had a successful festival run, and I don't think it ever had a theatrical release. And that's, this is its major point for getting press, and it's not going to get the kind of press that you would have traditionally pursued a few years ago as a documentary film.
Do you find yourself writing about at all works in progress? And when do you decide to write about a work in progress?
Well, I mean, as a critic, I don't. On our site, we do it every week. We have something called Project of the Day, and we have a bigger Project of the Day that we do sometimes where people can submit works in progress, and they have sort of like a log line that they give us, and we open it up for voting, and we just kind of whittle it down to a few contenders, and then we run a little piece about it. And that gets a great response. I've heard from festival programmers who really enjoy hearing about these things because they can keep tabs on them. As a critic, it's usually unfair, I think. That's the biggest challenge. I mean, you can't really talk about something, definitively if, in some way it's just not at that point where it should be seen in that fashion, But then again, if you're at a festival environment that invites discovery and discussion and so forth, I mean, I think if there is a screening of something that's a work in progress and it feels far enough along to at least enter the discussion in some fashion, and I'm not feeling like I just want to trash this thing, then I think there is maybe a little bit of a gray area.
Well, no, I mean, I can't imagine writing about an unfinished film for what I do. I mean, Variety wouldn't do it, and unless it fit into some larger piece where I was addressing a certain subject and that film I knew was being made, that might make it pertinent, but otherwise, it's like Eric said, it's unfair, kind of.
And yeah, most of the publications I write for are very consumer-facing, so they want to make sure that people can see the film relatively soon if we're writing about it. So,
Where rather than writing about films in progress, we're showing pieces of films that are being made still.
And this is on the Times site. And
Yeah.
And can you talk a little bit about the opinion?
Yeah. Well, it's the opinion section is launching today. In fact, something we call op docs, which are like op-ed documentaries, and in the print section today, we have a piece about Nixon's silent majority, which today is an anniversary of the speech from 1969. And then we mention in print a documentary, and online you can watch a documentary that is a self-contained short film that was made just for us, but it's based on a feature documentary in progress. So it's kind of like a preview of what these filmmakers are doing, and it's a pretty experimental documentary short, and then we include all this information about the directors and their director's statement and stuff like that. So several times a month we're going to have these original New York Times documentary shorts, and we have Errol Morris coming up November 22nd. So it's a mix of kind of very high profile and emergent filmmakers. We've posted a page, how to submit an opinion documentary. So if you go today to the opinion front where you find the first op doc, it will hopefully be easy for you to find. You'll see a link, how to submit an opinion video, because we're also taking op-ed contributor videos. We had we ran one from Robert Redford a few weeks ago about the Keystone XL pipeline. These are more like a traditional print op-ed, advocating specific policy positions and very clear arguments, but they're not really documentaries. And because it's within opinion, we do want things that express some perspective, even if it's just through an artistic treatment. Like the one today, there's no narration, there's no exposition, but Nixon is expressing his perspective about protesters and the majority of Americans versus the radicals. And so that's a kind of creative take. But we have other filmmakers who are first-person filmmakers, so it will be them on camera. So the thing that we don't really want is like, here's a cool thing, because that's more what the newsroom does. We're pretty open. We want to make it a really open forum, but you'll get a better sense online. We actually go through and describe exactly what we're looking for.
It's a question about works that sort of cross boundaries in a lot of media.
What's interesting about it is I mean, I've been following transmedia for a couple of years because I used to go to this conference that Henry Jenkins, who invented the term, held at MIT. And it was, for a little while, it was just felt like a super nerdy insider thing where, only the cool kids knew about it. Now there's a PGA credit for it, so it's been legitimized in a way. But the underlying principle, at least, the theoretical principles that were around before people were using the term to describe things that were being done, was that this thing had to work in every single permutation of it. So just because you have some DVD extras, I don't think that's transmedia. If you have a book that goes along with the movie or something like that, or some web series or something, that's great also, but it needs to be able to translate into each of those forms just as competently. Otherwise, the whole infrastructure falls apart. You might have a great movie, but the other stuff is totally discardable, and then in some ways it really isn't transmedia. So what we're seeing now is people are trying to make really good transmedia, and in the next few years we're going to see enough where editors will know what that means.
Yeah, but that said, I think that we're really at that changing point right now. Like Steve James has a transmedia component of The Interrupters that he's working on. Amir Bar-Lev has one for the Tillman story. So this is probably, the year, if not next year, where that becomes a major consideration, just because I think where the challenges are the projects that don't have a traditional film component attached, where that's just a whole new type of viewing and with it, criticism.